Hey everybody, it is Professor Parrish, and we are on week 4 of English 122. So in this week, we're going to be talking a little bit about setting, and I'll go ahead and pull up the module guide so you can kind of see what our assignments are for this week. The assignments basically, we're going to be doing a little talk about setting. In a few weeks, you're going to choose an element of fiction, such as character setting or point of view, and a short story, and you're going to analyze it through an essay. So I'm hoping that if you've been looking at the different stories that we've been reading so far for class, if any of them seem like one you'd want to evaluate further, you definitely can choose those for your papers. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you liked Rose for Emily or Cathedral, or you like the stories like To Build a Fire for this week, and you maybe decide you want to analyze it for your paper, you definitely will have the option to do so. So for this week, we do have our chapter on setting, which is pages 111 to 120, To Build a Fire, which is there on pages 125 to 134, and the Writing Effectively section at the end of the chapter. Obviously, we're going to go over the settings presentation here shortly, and then there'll be the setting quiz and discussion 4. So thanks to you all for doing so much hard work so far. If you got any questions, feel free to email me. But let's go back and go to module 4. And just talk about the discussion for this week. We'll go ahead and pop it up here and talk about it. The discussion for this week is just looking at To Build a Fire and seeing the active element of setting in this story is pretty important. And so I want to know what makes it relevant to you. So for example, if the story happened during a different time period, like modern times instead of when it happens in this story, would the outcome of the story be different? Why or why not? If the setting was in a desert rather than where it takes place, or a jungle, does the setting impact the plot of the story and the way that the characters interact in the story? Because that's something that we forget about. Oftentimes we think the setting is just a place where the story happens, but it does a lot more than that. The setting can actually influence the characters and their decisions throughout, which is pretty important to note, right? So that's the discussion for this week. Making sure that we've got that done. And then the setting quiz, again, not timed, 10 questions, pretty straightforward. That'll be due on Sunday, but let's look at the setting presentation for this week. And whenever it decides to load, we'll kind of zoom out a little bit. So with setting, and you can kind of see a little background there. Setting is often referred to as the time and place of a story. And time is very important because a lot of times historical context can be forgotten when people are thinking of the setting. It can prompt characters to act, realize, or reveal things about them. In our old textbook for English 122, when I used to teach, I liked how that textbook talked about how settings can mold characters and they can shape their actions and the reasons for the things that they do, right? So if you have Titanic here, you think of Jack Dawson and you think of Rose, and you think of how the setting of the ship impacts the ways that they do certain things in the story, right? It can include physical as well as emotional elements as well. So why should we study setting? Well, setting influences characters. It reveals their nature. It can also introduce different freedoms or constraints depending on the circumstances of the setting in the story. So take Hunger Games, for example. I used that back a few presentations ago. In the Hunger Games, the setting and location has a major impact on the choices that Katniss makes throughout the story. So it has a very, very big role to play. It's not just this is where it takes place at. It does a lot more for the story. And it can help us to connect to the literature. It can be appealing or interesting. It can also evoke different reactions. So for example, if you're watching The Crown on TV, if you're watching that series, setting plays a big point. Not just where it takes place at, but the time period, because that series differentiates throughout different periods of the series and it impacts the characters and how they feel and what they do. The elements of setting are the place where the story takes place, the time, the hour, year, century, the weather, the climate, as well as the atmosphere or feeling that it evokes. Also, the ways that writing is influenced by setting. You have historical fiction, in which the narrative is set in a specific time and place. You have regional setting that influences the locale, the geography, the folklore, even the dialect of characters. For example, the fact that To Kill a Mockingbird takes place where it does influences the way that the characters speak. That has a big impact as well. And then there's this term called naturalism, in which characters are presented as products or victims of the environments that they are faced with, right? So for example, Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, in that situation, naturalism, the characters, they are very much products of the setting in the story, and the setting drives them to do certain things and act in certain ways. That is the only book, for example, that I have actually thrown across the room at the ending. If you ever get to the ending of Grapes of Wrath, it's a doozy, it's a long book, and I got to the ending and read the last page and chucked my copy across the room. I was so frustrated. But I still remember that ending, and it's been several years, so I guess Steinbeck probably knew what he was doing. And then finally, in analyzing setting, does the setting help to motivate the plot? Does the external setting suggest an internal reality? So for example, Orange is the New Black takes place in a prison. Does that external setting of a prison reflect on the characters and their internal reality of how they feel and think about certain things? That can have a major impact, right? And does the setting change as the plot progresses? This is really important too, because some stories do, some stories don't. The horror movie Saw takes place in pretty much the exact same setting for 80% of the film. And lots of things happen, but the setting doesn't really change. And then you have other stories where the setting will drastically change throughout. So why is that? Why does that setting need to change or need to stay static? Is there a reason for that? And so those are just some kind of questions to think about as you're reading and as you're analyzing a piece of fiction. In this case for our first paper. So those are just some things to keep in mind as we go throughout the story. The only two things due this week are going to be that quiz and that discussion. But as always, you'll be able to go ahead. If you want to go ahead and look at Module 5, you can. I just, whether or not the lecture video should be up in the style guide if you want to check it out too. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I am happy to help answer them. But so far, everybody's doing great in the class. Kudos to you all. We're already to week 4, which is exciting because that means we're like a fourth of the way through the class, if you can believe it. So crazy times. But in any case, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care. And yes, I will be back next week with Module 5 for English 122. Bye.